Two families, same part of London, same combined income, and virtually the same monthly outgoings, both feeling reasonably in control of their money. Then a war starts, and within a few weeks, everything starts to feel a little different. By March 18th, 2026, however, one of them had absorbed around £400 in extra monthly costs without changing a single habit, whilst the other had absorbed the same hit and barely felt it. Same income, same city, same groceries. So what changed? Well, the war in the Middle East, of course. Albeit both families had completely different experiences of it, and neither family did anything to deserve the gap. This isn't a story about a conflict in the Middle East, however. It's a story about how a 26-mile stretch of water is quietly deciding how much money you get to keep. Two kinds of financial pain exist in the world, and only one of them shows up when you're actually looking for it. The first kind arrives with a letter, a phone call, a boiler that breaks on a Thursday night, something sharp enough that you register it, respond to it, and know exactly what it cost you before the week is out. The second kind never announces itself, doesn't appear on any tax return, and nobody puts your name on it. But it functions as a tax in every practical sense, and right now in March 2026, is being collected from you whether you're paying attention or not. Call it the invisible surcharge. And here's what makes it genuinely dangerous. The households that get hurt worse by it never see it coming, because it doesn't arrive at the door. It travels through the price of petrol, through your grocery receipt, through an energy bill that rises by a percentage that sounds manageable, until it lands alongside everything else, rising at the same time. What generates the invisible surcharge, how it moves through an economy, and why some households absorb it while others get pulled under. That's the gap between the two families I mentioned at the start of this video. And closing that gap is what this video is about. First, some context. In February, the oil price was around $68 a barrel, and 9 days later, by March 9th, it had reached $110, a significant increase in the world's most foundational commodity in under 2 weeks. And for context, the oil shock that followed the 1973 Yom Kippur War, the one that tipped Western economies into recession, produced similar percentage moves over months, not days. UK petrol prices were up around 7 pence per litre in the first 2 weeks of March, and diesel up around 16 pence. And diesel matters not just for lorries, but for every truck that moves everything you buy, from the warehouse to the shelf to your door. Which means that 16 pence increase doesn't stop at the pump. It travels forward through every product that was ever touched by a vehicle, and it hasn't finished arriving yet. The off-gem energy price cap forecasts an increase of 10% in July, adding around £160 to the typical annual bill, and Goldman Sachs warned that if the disruption runs past 2 months, European gas prices could more than double from where they stood in February, at which point a 10% energy bill rise starts to look like an optimistic number. And here's the figure that ties all of it together. The Office for Budget Responsibility put out a forecast saying consumer prices will be 1% higher by the end of the year than initially expected, and 1% sounds like nothing until you consider what happens to a pension pot compounding over 20 years in an inflation environment running persistently hotter than expected. The cost isn't 1%, it's the compounding of that gap across every year it persists, and that damage is quiet, and it accumulates. If you are interested in power of compounding, by the way, see my other video where I deep dive into the topic. So I've come up with at least 7 mechanisms I see doing the work of the invisible surcharge right now, and naming them clearly is how you begin to fight against them. The pump tax is the most visible of the group, and with oil over $100 a barrel, it underpins not just what you pay at the forecourt, but the cost of producing and moving almost everything made from or transported with hydrocarbons. And the petrol increase is already live, while the diesel increase hasn't finished working through supply chains. Which means the worst of the pump tax for us is still ahead, not behind. The container surcharge is where the war meets the shelf price of ordinary goods, and from March the 2nd, the world's largest shipping companies introduced emergency war risk fees of up to $4,000 per container, a cost that doesn't stop at the port, but passes through every step of the supply chain, importer, distributor, retailer, before landing in the price of whatever's in the box, whether that's a phone, a pair of trainers, or your medication. The Cape tax describes what happens when ships can't use the strait and instead sail around the southern tip of Africa, adding up to 15 extra days at sea and 30% more fuel per voyage. And right now, an estimated 3,200 ships sit idle inside the Persian Gulf, and when goods don't move, prices don't just rise, they spike. The fertilizer tax carries a delay of 4 to 6 months, which is exactly what makes it the most underestimated component of the group. India produces most of its fertilizer using natural gas. Qatar was a primary supplier of that gas, and has now effectively stopped exporting under force majeure. And when fertilizer costs climb, farming costs follow, and food prices follow after that. Not this week, but in the autumn. Buried under 6 months of news cycles by the time it reaches your grocery receipt, the chip delay tax landed in the sector few people anticipated, and the closure of air cargo operations across the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Bahrain has stranded semiconductors moving from Asia to Western markets, with electronics prices holding high and businesses trying to invest in technology facing higher costs at exactly the moment they were trying to move fastest. The shadow fleet asymmetry almost never gets discussed in mainstream coverage, and it matters. Iran spent a decade assembling tankers designed to move oil entirely outside the Western financial system. No Western insurance, no Western tracking. And those ships are currently the only ones moving reliably through the strait, which means Iranian oil reaches China, Turkey, and India, while Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait can't get their oil to Europe or Japan. And Western consumers are on the wrong side of that split every time they fill their car. The political paralysis tax is the most preventable component and the most frustrating to watch. The IEA proposed releasing 400 million barrels from strategic reserves, the largest release in the organization's history, and then the US Energy Secretary admitted publicly that the Navy wasn't ready to escort the tankers needed to make those flows safe, while the President simultaneously claimed the strait was open and threatened to take it over, and European nations stayed reluctant to commit forces because of wider friction with Washington. And the result is that the institutions designed to manage crises like this one have managed it, and the cost of that failure travels directly to ordinary people every time they fill their car. Sarah and James grew up in the same part of South London, attended the same university, and by 2026, they're both 44, working, have partners who work, and make around £85,000 with a mortgage of around £480,000. On paper, their financial lives are identical. Underneath the surface, though, Sarah's household runs about £800 a month of breathing room between what comes in and what's committed to go out, while James's household has £1,700 of breathing room, and the £900 a month gap in financial flexibility exists almost entirely because of car finance and subscription creep. Costs that felt small individually have compounded silently over years until they became structural. March arrives, and the invisible surcharge lands on both of them at the same time. Fuel costs climb for both, grocery bills nudge up for both, utilities hit higher for both, and the hit lands at roughly the same size. But it lands in completely different places, and that's where everything diverges. For James, the surcharge compresses his savings rate. He puts less into his ISA for 6 months, and life carries on without a debt event. For Sarah, the £800 of breathing room disappears entirely, and what fills the gap is a credit card. And that credit card is where the real cost lives. Not in the petrol, nor in the food, but in the interest accruing while she's too stretched to pay it down, and in the pension contribution she quietly stops making, because the mental weight of the monthly shortfall leads her to defer decisions she'd otherwise make automatically. Run that forward 10 years, through the compounding of what didn't get saved and what got paid in interest, and the gap between Sarah and James at retirement lands at around £140,000, built from the same income, the same house, the same London, the same war, and the single difference was how much room they had when something unexpected arrived. For anyone in their 20s or 30s, what this moment is demonstrating is that your fixed cost structure will determine how every future crisis lands on you, and you're young enough that the current surcharge is survivable, but the window to build genuine breathing room is now, not during the next shock, and the target is keeping committed monthly costs below 60% of take-home pay, because below that, you carry a real buffer, and above 70% every external hit becomes a dead event. For anyone in their 40s, the question isn't whether this surcharge reaches you, it will, but whether your structure absorbs it without going backwards on pension contributions, and if breathing room is thin, car finance is usually the most effective lever, and if you're currently on a standard variable energy tariff, the arithmetic in March 2026 favors locking in a fixed deal before future rises come in. For anyone in their late 40s to early 50s, the food inflation story is the most important forward risk right now, and it hasn't fully arrived yet, because the fertilizer-driven price increases hit in Q3 and Q4, and stocking 3 months of staple groceries now. Rice, pasta, tinned goods, cooking basics effectively lock in February prices for a portion of your autumn spend. For anyone 55 or above, energy costs compounding against a fixed income represent the central exposure. A further rise in October is possible if the strait stays closed, and calling your energy provider this week to understand your tariff and whether fixed rate options remain available is the single most time-sensitive action on this list. And holding a cash component in investment savings isn't timid right now. It's a sensible buffer against a cost environment moving faster than most people's incomes. Picture yourself at 70, sitting in your kitchen on a Tuesday morning, a cup of tea in front of you that you made without a single thought about what it costs, mortgage paid off, a car that's a little old but running fine because you never ended up needing the newer one you nearly bought, and whatever the geopolitical crisis of 2040 turns out to be, and there will be one, it registers as a mild irritation rather than an emergency, and you watch the news with genuine curiosity rather than anxious mental arithmetic, whilst your children are doing okay, partly because you stayed out of debt during the hard years, which meant you had something left to offer when it actually mattered. Now picture yourself at 70 in a different version of that same morning. Same kitchen, same kettle, but running a calculation you run every Tuesday for 20 years. Can you cover this month? Because the credit card that started in 2026 never quite went away. It became a permanent feature of your financial life, sometimes small, sometimes large, depending on what the world decided to do with energy prices in any given year. And your pension is smaller than it should be, because there were 5 or 6 years where contributions stopped to service the monthly gap. And you're not in crisis, but you're not free either. And the difference between free and not free isn't enormous in any single month. It's just permanent. The distance between those two versions of the same person wasn't income, and it wasn't luck, and it wasn't any kind of extraordinary discipline or sacrifice. It was a series of structural decisions made in the years before and during moments exactly like this one. A 26-mile straight, a military operation, a tax that nobody announced, arriving on a Tuesday morning in March 2026 and asking every household in the country the same quiet question. I found myself reflecting on things quite a lot whilst putting this video together, so I hope this video was somewhat useful and insightful. If so, please leave a like and press the subscribe button, as it helps get this video out to those who can benefit from these conversations, as well as ensuring you're updated every time I release a new video.